All right, hey everybody, thanks for coming back to Test 2 Plus today. I'm here, Trace, with Kat Odell from Eater, drinks editor over there, and she is our expert on wine. Thank you for coming back.
Thanks for having me.
And today we are drinking some tasty Sauv Blanc right here from the Bay Area. It's very tasty.
Local, love it.
Mm-hmm. Am I supposed to be holding this in a specific way while we enjoy the wine?
You know, there's no stem, so I would say, general rule, keep your hand as far away from the wine just so you don't warm it.
So
like as opposed to this.
The stem is supposed to allow you to not warm the drink.
Right.
Warm up the wine.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yes.
What about in room temperature wines? Is it just less important then, or?
Same idea with red wine, but I think it's a little bit less important.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what about wine pairing?
Yes.
You know, as far as there are like specific flavors of wine and there are specific types of food that those wines tend to go with. You know, most people understand white wine tends to go with fish and red wines tend to go with like beefs and like mammal meat, I guess, if you want to go that way.
Sure.
Yeah.
Definitely. So there's a sort of famous saying in the wine world, foods that grow together go together. So oftentimes if you're looking at pairings, you can look to regions and the grapes that are grown in that region and the wines that are made there often pair with whatever the indigenous cuisine is. But in general, what you're really looking for are complementary flavors.
Okay.
And what's most important to consider, you have acidity, you have fat, you have bitter, salty, sweet, basically all of the flavors that you think about right on your palate when you're eating something.
Right. Okay.
So
what? Pick a flavor and tell me then what should go with that.
Sure. So let's say you're eating something really fatty, right? You'd want to balance that with acid. So the acid, or even if you're having a red wine, tannins. So the two serve to basically counterbalance each other. So I guess I can give you the example of a red wine and a really rich steak like a Wagyu. So what you have there is, let's say, a Cab or a Merlot, which are varietals that are more tannic in general. And I actually, for me, Italian wines tend to be very, very tannic, and the tannins equal astringency and kind of has this drying characteristic on your tongue. Yeah, it does.
For those at home, I'm making kissy faces, just so you know.
So think about when you have that sort of dryness on your palate, right? What do you want to offset that? Something rich and buttery, right?
Yeah.
So the wine serves to cut through the richness in the meat, whereas vice versa, you have the richness in the meat and the unctuousness, which really cuts through and brightens and mellows out that bitterness.
Wine pairing is sort of like the sweet and salty. You know, they go well together because they kind of fight back and forth on your palate, which makes it more exciting.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Very cool. That's really nice. So tannins, you've mentioned a couple of times, they are really big when it comes to pairing wine. Yeah? So tannins are found in the skin, in the seeds, in the stems, and in the wood that the wine is aged in. Yeah. And then red wine obviously has more tannins than white wine, which is why it does better with richer foods like meats and creamy stuff as well, I imagine. And then white wine has some tannins, but not nearly as many.
Right, exactly. So white wine still has tannins from the fruit and but also depending on the way that the grapes were crushed. If they were crushed whole, sometimes winemakers crush only the berries. Sometimes they crush with seeds. Sometimes they crush with stems. And so that would also add more tannin to the wine. But then for white wine specifically, it's how the wines are aged. So the wine will absorb tannins from wooden barrels, essentially.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes are they aged not in wooden barrels to kind of make them brighter?
Absolutely.
Or if
Stainless steel.
Yeah, if you crushed just the berry, no seeds, no stems, and even like somehow, I guess, skinned them, would that be a very like light tannin, bright kind of wine? Exactly.
And then there is actually another way to age wine, which is very ancient, and it's in clay amphoras. So these old clay, basically barrels that I think for me add more of a minerality as opposed to kind of like warm, toasty notes that one would attribute more to barrels, so like the oak and flavors like that.
Whoa. Where did you learn about wine? How did you learn all this stuff?
Well, truth be told, when I was 10 years old, my dad decided that I needed to develop a palate.
Okay.
So it started at age 10. Don't tell my mom. Shh.
Okay. Mom, don't watch this. Shh, stop.
Just kidding.
So you learned kind of the palate. Do you think it has to do with kind of teaching yourself to pay attention to it, or is there also just a natural palate that some people have?
I I think it's both. I think that you really learn about wine by drinking it. I remember when I was 10 and, taking sips here and there from wine on my, parents' dinner table, it always tasted like acid, like vinegar, right? And I think the more you taste, you kind of understand the flavors you're tasting. But also some people, I believe it's actually scientifically proven, some people have more taste buds than others, and there's the term like super taster.
Right.
So I think that some people are naturally better tasters just because they are equipped with a better palate to try and distinguish flavors.
Right.
But likewise, I think that tasting wine is also learned, and it's really just exposing yourself to as much as possible.
Right. Yeah. And that brings us, of course, to the kings of wine tasting and queens as well, the sommelier. And you were mentioning earlier when we were kind of running through this that there are different levels of being a sommelier. I've seen the documentary Somm. I just want you to know it was cool. It was very strange to me that people would just sit around and spit in buckets and and talk about, you just throw adjectives out at each other to try and describe all of this wine. But you're saying that's kind of the best way to go, is literally just try wines and try and describe it as best you can.
Really, I think it is. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So how do these levels work?
There are 230 Master Sommeliers in the world, and Master Somm is essentially the 4th level, and it's incredibly difficult to be certified as a Master Somm.
There's 230 like
in the world
ever or just right now?
I think it's got to be ever, because I think the Guild of Master Sommeliers began in 1969.
Okay,
so it's not
new.
Something that's incredibly, centuries old.
Right.
But it's just, so there's levels. Basically, you can go through level 1, 2, 3, 4, and so level 1, which is what I was planning to take, is just it's a multiple choice exam. You answer 70 questions, you get more than 60 correct, you pass level 1.
Got it.
Level 2, there's actually a service component, so it's like properly serving wine, and then you also have a blind tasting.
Okay.
And then level 3, same deal, but it's a lot harder.
Okay.
And then level 4 is kind of like the be all end all. I know people that have studied for a decade. I think they talk about in Somm, there's people that take that exam so many times over, 10, 15 times, and they don't pass. It's really that challenging, because on that exam, you need to be able to pinpoint a wine from pretty much anywhere in the world, know the producer, know the year, know exactly where it was made. And think about the world of wine. It's so intimidating to so many people, because there's so much to know, there's so much out there. And to be able to in some way know everything, which you can't really ever do.
Right.
Who can actually do that?
Yeah. We're not endorsing, that documentary necessarily, but it really was eye-opening. The people would put so much effort into this kind of world, and understanding from a sip and a smell, they're like, oh, it was this grape, it's from this winery, it's this vintage, and
Exactly.
like it's mind-blowing.
And
it really is.
And I think that ties back to what we were talking about before, terroir. So, being able to deduce based on the juice in your glass, climate, weather, all those are major points that come into play. And, the way styles that are from specific regions, you've just figured that out from sipping a wine. It's crazy.
Some of those things, of course, are can be kind of tricked with marketing as well. The quality of the wine is one thing. The way that wine is marketed can make you think of a whole different thing.
Sure.
So what about boxed wine? I drink boxed wine at home. I like it. It's fine. Cameraman's nodding. He's drinking boxed wine. Everybody's drinking boxed wine. Is that terrible?
So I'm going to say no. I'm going to say in the past, box wine was not very good. But I think as there are more wine producers, there's more of a focus on sustainability and being green. Boxed wine is a way to be more eco-friendly and consider the environment. But in general, it's not all bad, and there are some producers out there that are making good boxed wines.
Right. What about screw top versus cork?
So the idea behind screw top versus cork is a cork allows oxygen to penetrate into the wine. So if you're aging a wine, you need to have a wooden cork, because screw top doesn't allow oxygen to flow. So traditionally, it's always been the wooden cork, but now producers are getting into the screw top game, and there are great screw top wines that are made as well.
Okay, so screw top, it really just depends on what you're looking
style,
for.
Right.
Yeah. FYI, the airtight design of boxed wine allows wines to keep for longer. You don't need special equipment. Once you've opened a bottle, you've exposed the wine to the oxygen. Once that happens, the wine starts to react with the oxygen.
Right.
Now, a boxed wine, because of the way the valves are designed to get it out, doesn't react with the oxygen except for right there at the point of contact. So the wine inside can last longer. So if you say don't drink a lot of wine, boxed wine can help without having to buy those expensive wine keepers.
Definitely.
There are also, of course, downsides. Some bags in the past that are inside of that box can contain BPA, and bisphenol A is connected to a number of different health problems, and it's not usually in products anymore, but it's possible, and on top of that, they are more eco-friendly, which I think that's something that people don't think about.
Yeah, and you get a better value because you have more. You're not paying for the packaging of a 750 ml of wine, so it's actually a good value.
Yeah. So when it comes to drinking wine, this wine has been sitting here this whole time, and is that making the wine better somehow? I mean, other than temperature-wise, I guess.
Yeah.
But we always have to say wine has to breathe.
Right.
You buy really cheap wine and it seems like it has to breathe somehow, right?
Right, or you see people swirling there.
Right, yeah.
It's
I mean, there are decanters, and there's a whole industry built up around making sure that the thing in the bottle somehow breathes better. What does that even mean?
So the idea behind aerating wine is generally for wines that, not always, but I think Riesling is a good wine to decant if it's an older Riesling, red wines in general, but a lot of the white wine, I feel like for the most part you aerate red wines, but that's kind of like a general rule of thumb. That's not entirely true to say that you wouldn't aerate a white, because there are whites that you would.
Yeah.
In general, you're aerating a wine because it's older and it's been cooped up in a bottle for however many years, and you want the particles in the wine and the aromatic components and compounds to be able to open up and express their full bouquet. So unless you're doing that, the properties, the compounds in the wine tend to still be very sort of closed off, and they don't fully express themselves. So while you can absolutely drink a wine without decanting or without aerating, you're going to end up, if you do a glass-to-glass taste test of that same wine which is not aerated, you'll see a big difference between the two.
Yeah. If I were to try a wine right out of the bottle, say an older wine, I don't know when I would get an older boxed wine at my house, but still, you try right out of the bottle and it would taste one way, and it's not that it would taste bad, but it would taste maybe better?
So the word that I use, which probably isn't very helpful if you try an old wine that hasn't been aerated, is tight. So you taste the wine, but you feel like there could be more for the wine to express of itself, if that makes any sense. And in general, it just becomes more aromatic, and it's like adding MSG to a wine. It just becomes more flavorful.
I do love MSG.
Just kidding, don't actually do that.
Don't put MSG in your wine, but if you're going to make ramen,
there you go.
You really do want it in there. Look, Kat is obviously a wealth of knowledge on these topics. So make sure that you go to Eat Her. You can go to the website. You can look up her drinks. She's the drinks editor, so you can look up her stuff. You can also subscribe to their YouTube channel, and you can see Kat eating food all over the place. It's pretty incredible, actually. I'm really jealous. But make sure you do that. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
If people have questions about food, can they find you somewhere?
Yes,
Twitter?
Kat_Odell.
Great. So thank you so much for tuning in to Test 2 Plus today, and we will see you next time. Let us know down in the comments if you have a favorite wine, boxed, bottled, corked, screw-topped, whatever it is. We want to know about it. Thanks again. See you later.